Hey everybody,
We are
good
sorry,
morning.
but we are experiencing a problem with our system.
Thank you so much
Please
for
try your
joining
call again
us.
later or report a problem through the Blog Talk Radio.
Thank you so much everybody for joining us. This is Harriet Cammock with Down to Earth, the show in which we talk about the issues that matter. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us this morning on our broadcast. Hey, good morning everybody. Thank you so much. I had a great birthday, so we're still celebrating, but we do have some things to talk about. Thanks so much. As you can see, I'm still in preparation mode and kind of still going along with it because it's such a topic that kind of grabbed my attention as I was scrolling through the news feeds yesterday. And I just wanted to share with you, I want to thank everybody on Instagram and Facebook who reached out to say happy birthday. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That really was truly heartfelt and truly something to talk about. And I wanted to just talk about how we have evolved. I mean, 2019 is over. Let's just say that, right? 2019 is almost done. So I know most of you are doing your vision boards for 2020. People still do vision boards, right? Because people say it helps them to focus. I think it's the focusing that is getting people to focus, right? You can tell I'm not a vision board fan. I'm one of those people who use folders, binders, right? So I use project binders. So everything I'm working on at the time is in a binder, right? So I feel very disorganized when I don't have my stuff written out. So I'm still one of those people who still use a planner, right? And I'm still one of those people who write stuff down. You know, in my planner, I write. If I have a meeting, I write the main points I want to score at the meeting and so on. So I hope we're all working on our plans for 2020 because we have a lot to do in 2020. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we might want to talk about. So I hope you are tuned in, right? And you are ready to join us as we continue to explore the issues that matter. So today we want to talk about racism in banking, and it's something that kind of caught my attention, as I was saying, and I've kind of just wanted to go with it because it's something that it's one of those things that as you go along, you realize that something is askew. And I want to set the background for it. And here's what happened. A black JP Morgan employee and a customer secretly recorded conversations with other bank employees. And the customer was a player in the National Football League. He had a net worth of $13 million. And he tried to become a client of JP Morgan. You know, people have money and they want to make more money. And the clients, the people at the bank didn't think that he should become a client of the bank. And then they brought in another client who is black and who had just gotten an annuity settlement of $400,000. And when she tried to become a client, they said, well, she's just going to go through that in 24 months, so we don't need her as a client. We'd be wasting bank resources on her. And I was like, you kidding me? But you do that for white people who walk in with $100,000. So that's the stage we want to talk about with what happened here at JP Morgan. So this is a story, as usual, pulled straight from the headlines. It's on the New York Times. And it actually was written yesterday on my birthday. So this guy, Mr. Jimmy Kennedy, earned $13 million. And when he tried to become a private client at JP Morgan, it would give him exclusive travel discounts, event invitations, better deals on loans, and so on. He kept getting the runaround. At first, he didn't understand why. Then last fall, he showed up at his local JP Morgan branch in Arizona, and an employee, happy thank you, offered an explanation. You're bigger than the average person, and you're also an African American, the employee told him. We're in Arizona. I don't have to tell you about what the demographics are. They don't see people like you a lot. Mr. Kennedy recorded the conversation and shared it with the New York Times. So it's no secret that racism has been baked into the American banking system. There are very few black executives in the upper echelons of most financial institutions. And leading banks, this is what the New York Times is saying, leading banks have recently paid restitution to black employees for isolating them from white peers, placing them in the poorest branches, and cutting them off career opportunities. Black customers are sometimes profiled, viewed with suspicion just for entering a bank, and questioned over the most basic transactions. Lord God. This year, black mortgage borrowers were charged higher interest rates than white borrowers and were denied mortgages that would have been approved for white applicants. Banks, including JP Morgan, say they're committed to eradicating the legacy of racism, and they insist that any lingering side effects, look at you and I laughing at this thing, simply reflect stubborn socioeconomic imbalances in society as a whole, not racial bias among their employees. I want to laugh so hard. Mr. Kennedy was told he was too black. His financial advisor complained that he too was a victim of racial discrimination. What makes their cases extraordinary is that the two men say they faced discrimination. It is that they recorded their interactions with bank employees, preserving a record. Oh, God. Listen to this. Patricia Wexler, a JP Morgan spokeswoman, defended the bank's statement of Mr. Peters, saying that the bank hadn't been aware of all the audio recordings. So you're telling me that you're not aware of the audio recordings, but that the fact that they recorded their conversations and attested to the racism that the bank practiced, I'm getting there in a minute, that doesn't exist because they recorded their conversation? Oh my God. Oh my God. He sought a promotion to become a private client after working there for almost 10 years with the wealthier. The promotion never came. Instead, he was moved out of an office at the heart of the branch where he worked with others and was relegated to a windowless room in the back. That's not racism? In April of 2017, one of his bosses told Mr. Peters that another manager had accused him of taking customer files home at night. When Mr. Peters denied it and Mr. Venero accepted that he was telling the truth, Mr. Peters needed to be more cognizant of how his colleagues perceived him. You experienced something similar? Tell me about it. I want to hear. Mr. Peters was left with the impression that his managers who were predisposed to view him suspiciously. Could he prove it? No. What happened next was clear. Mr. Peters complained to Mr. Venero that another financial advisor was trying to steal a prospective client, a woman who had just received a $372,000 wrongful death settlement after her son died. She was black. Mr. Venero told Mr. Peters that there was no point in his intervening in the dispute because the woman was not a worthwhile client. You've got somebody who's coming from Section 8, never had a nickel to spend. Listen to this profiling. And now she's got $400,000? What do you think's going to happen with that money? It's gone. So Mr. Peters, the black employee of the bank, said, but that's why we get involved. You're not investing a dime for this lady, he said. He knew from experience that she would quickly burn through the money. It happens every single time. When Mr. Peters tried to argue, Mr. Venero interjected, this is not money she respects. She didn't earn it. When the New York Times tried to interview him, he declined to comment. Ms. Wexler, the bank spokeswoman, said that Mr. Venero was put on leave after inquiries from the Times and that he resigned last Thursday. Oh my God. Then Mr. Peters, the bank employee, was transferred to a less wealthy neighborhood. It's another example of managers mistreating him because he's black. So when he met Mr. Kennedy, he knew that he had played for the NFL. He joined the New York Giants and so on. Mr. Kennedy retired and moved to Phoenix. JP Morgan bankers had been, but he hadn't liked the financial advisors the bank had proposed. Then he met Mr. Peters. So Mr. Kennedy gradually moved $800,000 to the bank. This is the former NFL player, right? Mr. Peters and a colleague promised he would get private client status, which was reserved for accounts with more than $250,000. So Mr. Peters got him. But on August 24, he filed a formal, he said, he alerted Mr. Venera that I feel like I'm being treated differently because of my race and color of my skin. And Mr. Venera said, well, the solution obviously is for you to work in a less wealthy branch. Less than 2 weeks later, JP Morgan agreed to pay $24 million to end a class action suit brought by other black employees who said the company had discriminated against them in some cases by isolating them from colleagues and dumping them in poorer branches. Oh my God. On October 5th, Mr. Venera took Mr. Peters to a meeting room and said he was being fired. Mr. Peters filed a discrimination claim with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Civil Rights Division of the Arizona Attorney General's office, accusing JP Morgan, right? And they said they stand by their decision. Mr. Peters disputed the facts. He said that he had given credit to the correct employee. He said the bank was using a mundane internal dispute. Mr. Peters' termination left Mr. Kennedy in the lurch. A number of his transactions were frozen or not carried out. In one case, at $92,000, Mr. Kennedy's money was supposed to go into a new investment product, ended up in a holding account inaccessible to Mr. Kennedy. The bank, of course, says this was caused by administrative efforts. I don't do business with big banks. The biggest bank I do business with is PNC Bank. I do not like big banks because big banks do not like people of color. JP Morgan assigned him a new financial advisor. Mr. Kennedy thought he was inexperienced. He was black, and Mr. Kennedy felt that was the only reason they had been paired. So they're even trying to make it look worse. So Mr. Kennedy began recording their conversations so he could get feedback from other people about Mr. Belton's financial recommendations. Mr. Kennedy felt that he had been granted the private client status. When Mr. Kennedy learned that was not the case, he complained to Mr. Belton and Mr. Venera. Mr. Belton warned Mr. Kennedy not to talk to Mr. Venera again. In 2 secretly recorded conversations, he asked Mr. Kennedy to think about the impression he left on people at the bank. He pointed out Mr. Kennedy was a big black man in Arizona, and he said that Mr. Venera had been afraid to tell Mr. Kennedy that his application had to become a private client had been deleted when Mr. Peters was fired. And then Mr. Kennedy tried to ask why was that happening. And Mr. Belton said that bank employees were scared of dealing with him and that therefore Mr. Kennedy would be better off interacting only with. They're not going to say this, but I don't have the same level of intimidation that they have. You know what I'm saying? Not only being a former athlete, but also being 2 black men. You sit in front of him, you're like 3 times his size. You feel what I'm saying? He probably has perception of how these interactions could go. Oh my God. Talk about racial profiling. Mr. Kennedy pulled his money out of JP Morgan and filed a grievance with an industry watchdog. And in June, the bank sent him a letter trying to put an end to his complaining. Of course, big banks win. Hey, y'all. Hey, you my people. My people, do not do business with big banks. Okay? Unless you're white, of course, in which case they're probably going to treat you well just because you're white. But if you're a person of color, go find a credit union, a local bank. Matter of fact, go find a bank staffed by people of your color who treat you with decency. As a matter of fact, I am the person who, if I walk into your institution, whether you're black or white, and if you don't treat me as the person that I am, as a person, as a human being, with dignity and respect, I have nothing more to do with your organization. I have nothing to do with whatever you're selling. This goes right across the board for me. This is not something that I allow to happen. But if it does happen, and when it does happen, I respond to it. I call it out. I tell it what it is. The bank I do business with that I like is PNC Bank. I like them because consistently, it's been a number of years, they treat me with decency and respect. When I walk into the branch, I'm treated as if I'm a human being. If I call on the phone, they still treat me as a human being, right? So for me, that's how banking should be. Faceless, I'm just a person. I am a human being with a desire to do business with a bank, right? That's how I want to be perceived. If I go into a big box store, I'm a human being who wants to buy something from your store. I don't have to be there. I can buy it online anonymously. But if I choose to buy something from your store, I expect to be treated with decency and respect, don't you think? Right. So in this scenario that we just talked about, it is very clear, based on the incidents outlined in this New York Times article, that JP Morgan is guilty of practicing racism, and that it is all across the board, and that the culture, we know from experience that the culture of an organization comes from the top. The people who work in that branch in Arizona cannot independently be racist. You know why? It's a culture thing. They can't just independently, for a national bank, just choose to be racist. That's something that comes from the top. It filters on down. The perception that JP Morgan is so racist it culminated a few weeks ago. Do you remember the 60-minute interview with the CEO of JP Morgan, in which he tried really hard to change the perception that he is not racist? This is not something that is unique just to America. In fact, in Paris, in a certain part of Paris, because our perception of Paris is that it's all glamorous and stuff, right? And that it's all streets made of gold and blah, blah, blah. That's utter baloney. JP Morgan has been doing business in Paris, France for over 100 years. There is one particular section of Paris that they stopped doing business in because of good old-fashioned racism. So when the people there started making tracks that they used to do business with the merchants who were there, and because the neighborhood changed over time, now you're pulling your business out, they started to respond, JP Morgan, on a global scale to that global accusation of racism. I read the story. So here comes the CEO, who is a millionaire. He's a billionaire, as a matter of fact. The CEO of JP Morgan is a billionaire. He's one of the few employees of an organization in America who is a billionaire. He's been making money fists over dollars for decades. He started out really early, right? So he's a billionaire. And so he wanted to change the perception that he's not a bad guy, and that big banks and Wall Street are not bad people. They're really not rapacious capitalists. They're really not snakes. They're really not people who really are just intent on making money for themselves. And the rest of us are dying with laughter. The rest of us are just laughing, because how many of us have tried to get a loan from a big bank and you can't pass muster? And you see how somebody else with a worse business plan, less capital investment, less structure, walks in and they just get a line of credit, just easy cheesy, get a line of credit to go start a yoga studio in Midtown. I kid you not. Banking is racism. There is a perception that people, and this is why white people rob banks and get away with it all the time, because they're looking for the black person to walk in who is the bank robber, and the white guy walks in, puts on blackface, dresses like a black person, put on blackface makeup, and get away with it all the time. Because the perception is that black people walk into a bank and don't have any money and do not know what they're doing and cannot get it together. It's racism. And it's as JP Morgan said in their own words, it's a legacy of racism. And I don't know how many black millionaires is it going to take for them to stop it. I don't know how many, Hispanic millionaires or Arab millionaires is it going to take? How many brown millionaires will it take for JP Morgan and other banks like it? There's Bank of America. There's Wells Fargo. They're all equally racist. And ladies and gentlemen, this is why so many people are dying from deaths of despair. Because people have ideas that they can't communicate, that they try to work their ideas. They walk into a banking institution with a plan and they can't get a startup loan to get started. But you have some wild-eyed white kid who has no plan, no nothing, and they underwrite him and fund him. If Mark Zuckerberg were black, we would have never had Facebook. They would have given Facebook to a white guy. But Mark Zuckerberg could walk into a bank as a student at Harvard. Think about that. As a student at Harvard, and could convince the bank to lend him money to buy servers. Have you thought about that? How many black and brown people have similar ideas and walk into financial institutions and get thrown out on their ear? You've got to see that there is something very, very wrong. There is something very, very wrong with the state of banking. The whole society is racist. The racism and this legacy of racism permeates the atmosphere. Recently, I did a story on the last slave ship that went to Alabama. It's called Clotilla. The last slave ship that went to Alabama was funded by a white man who invested $35,000. He had a net worth of $35,000. 150 or 170 years ago. That same $35,000, his descendants today are worth $55 million. Some of them own a bank. I say to everybody who is a descendant off of that slave ship, everybody should file a class action lawsuit and take them for every penny, because they went to Africa after slavery had been abolished and declared illegal internationally and in the Americas. He still got on a ship, went to Africa, took people, kidnapped people, and performed what we now today call human trafficking. Brought them back and enslaved them, even though slavery was illegal, because in those days you didn't have people riding around, protecting the law or whatever. They were more interested in protecting the white men, right? And he performed that, and today his descendants are worth $55 million off of the enslavement of the backs of black people. I'm not that kind of black person who sit back and laugh at something like that. You're going to give me my damn money. I'm coming for it. And I want my money. And you're going to give me my money that you used my ancestors to get. Y'all lucky I wasn't born here, because I would have filed a lawsuit long time ago. Because this is unreal and unbelievable. Where I grew up, our ancestors had land. And yeah, they participated in slavery. We had ancestors who were black, so they're slaves. They were enslaved. And I also have ancestors who perhaps participated. Right? But at least they left the land for all of us. What has happened over here? We have a legacy of racism that continues to perpetuate to this day. It happens in educational institutions. It happens inside of churches and religious institutions. It happens inside of corporations. It's the reason why your black and brown student graduates from college with a master's degree and still can't find a job, but a white person who has a degree from a community college is running things. You go into any state government apparatus in this country, and you will find a number of white people who have been working there for decades without, some of them barely have a high school diploma, but the young black person working there has a master's degree. If that is something is not wrong with that picture, I don't know what is. You're not surprised, not at all. Racism is alive and well, and it continues to perpetuate. And the people who are practicing it, they know you ought to be held accountable. They all ought to be held accountable. This is why I don't do business with big banks. Years ago, I'm just going to tell you a true story. Years ago, I opened an account with Bank of America. And I am an author and a speaker. So when I go out to speak, and I sell books, right? People buy my books. Have you bought my book? You can read it. My books are all electronic, so you can get them, download them onto your phone, and get them, right? And I kid you not. So I opened what they call a merchant checking account, a business checking account, and to accept credit card payments, you become a merchant. I was unaware that due to my ethnicity, they were running a criminal background check. I didn't know such a thing happened when you go to open a checking account. I thought they just did a credit check or whatever they do to see if you have issues. So while I did it online, and then I got a phone call from the bank. And when I said why, that's when they explained it to me. It was Bank of America. It was a black employee. He said, and he explained to me, he said, we run you through the system because of what, because he didn't say because of racism. He said, we check criminal background of people. And I said, why would you need to do that? Why is that necessary? I couldn't understand it. He was later removed because maybe he was on a recorded line and he exposed it. At the time, it never occurred to me to ask other people who were attempting to open a business checking account if this was normal. It never occurred to me because I'd never experienced it. So I didn't know that this was pervasive and that this was something that continued to happen. A few months later, it occurred to me. So I asked my then boss if that were true. And he said, no, why would anybody want to do that? That's when I realized it was racism. So I marched to the Bank of America branch across the street and I laid into that. Right? I was like, I'm not interested in doing business with you. Right? And then I had a small checking account with PNC Bank. We've been friends ever since. Right? Do you see what I'm saying? So racism is alive and well. And racism is like an organ that has tentacles. People are talking here. Hey, they do all kinds of racist stuff without us having no idea that they're doing. Absolutely. Right? It's so alive. It's like an organ and it has tentacles and outreach. Right? And people are asleep at the switch. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to call this stuff out. Don't just sit back and internalize it and take it personally that, I feel embarrassed. And then the white people in the bank or other people are looking at you so you feel embarrassed. Say, hell no, this is racism. And I'm going to put you on the 6 o'clock news, record the interaction and send it to the New York Times, send it to your local paper, put it out on Facebook and let them be embarrassed. Until we embarrass them and call out these instances, it's not going to stop. Until they realize that, wait a minute, until they start hurting and realize that public perception, because now when I have money, there is one bank that you're not going to find me talking to. It's JP Morgan Chase. There's another one called Bank of America. There's another one called Wells Fargo. You ain't going to find me talk to them, period. I will have money and they will come calling and I'll be like, are you kidding me? You're racist. Show me your portfolio where you have black businesses on your portfolio that you haven't written off or forced them out of business, put them into foreclosure. The mortgage crisis was created by greedy Wall Street hedge fund managers. We know that. But it was also perpetuated by big banks who saw an opportunity to make a lot of money. The opportunity they saw was to collect the money up front, then sell the loan off to another subprime lender, while at the same time their money is insured. So they were making money 3 ways to Sunday. They didn't lose anything. And then on top of that, Barack Obama bailed them out. On top of that, Barack Obama bailed out Wall Street. As if it weren't enough. Meanwhile, you and I on Main Street, we're struggling. But they bailed out the big banks under the pretense that the big banks can't fail. If they fail, the economy fail. No! Ladies and gentlemen, this is how banking works. When the bank feels like it's going to run out of money, when the economies feel like they're going to run out of money, you know what they do? They go into a room and they print more money. It's paper. So they print more money. Put the $100 bill and Ben Franklin's face on it. Put a serial number on the paper they just printed and distribute it to the bank. The bank no longer has a shortage of money. This is why we never run out of money. They got the money. They got the paper they printed on.